channel later on. We are up and running. So just a bit of some housekeeping items. And those of you that have joined us, you've been doing a great job in the past. If you are new, we do appreciate if you can keep your microphone on mute. This is helps not only the speaker but also the other folks that are joining us. And please keep your video off also. This will cut down on bandwidth and it just makes for a better presentation. As I mentioned, we are recording this, so you'll be able to view this later if you wish to refer to it, or if you want to let your friends know about it. You can turn around and watch it on our YouTube channel later on. You will receive a survey. This helps us in providing it. We enjoy that feedback, and it gives us a good idea of potential future programs, lectures that we can pull together. So with that being said, we can see here the list. So we're a little bit shortened for November and December with the holidays coming on. But today, I am Paul Winsky with AgriLife Extension. I am the horticulture agent, and I will be talking on plant disease identification. Next week, we will have fall gardening chores. Mr. Shannon Dietz, our Ag and Natural Resources agent, will be speaking on that. A very time appropriate topic, holiday plant care, will be covered by Brandy Keller on the 19th, right before the holiday. On the 3rd, we're going to have Amanda Cripple, who is our FCH agent, and she's going to speak on food preservation. This is going to be a follow-up to the food safety. We had some positive feedback on that, so she's agreed to come and speak again. And then on the 10th, we're going to do something different. We're just going to have an open forum. We may have some slides on topics that or questions that we've had, but if you have questions or you'll be able to post them and ask us. The three of us will be on, and we'll see how it goes. We haven't done an open forum, but it will be Ask an Agent. So we're looking forward to that to round out things before the holidays. So let's get started. Plant disease identification. Everyone's always got questions about plant diseases. Sometimes they are misdiagnosed. And what we want to do today is help you out, help you understand what to look for if it is a plant disease, or maybe if it's an abiotic issue, like we like to call it. So what is a plant disease? It's really an alteration of that plant, and it interferes with its normal appearance. Yellowing leaves, blotching, functioning. All right, it's got a wilting look to it, but you've watered it, so something is going on there, and ultimately it affects the value, or it's unfit for its normal use. So if you're a greenhouse grower, you're not going to be able to sell that. You can't ship it. If you've got it in the landscape, it doesn't look good. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. It just has that blah look to it. There's something going on. I like this next quote. I just read an article. Paul Pilon, he is a perennial guru. He's got a business perennial solutions consulting. And I thought it was appropriate for today. And his quote is, we use fungicides for bad cultural practices, not because of the diseases. And so if you really think about that, the ball is in our court. We know we've got to deal with the environment and things like that, but are we putting our plants in the best light? Are we offering them the best conditions, or do we have them planted too closely? Or we're not getting enough airflow, or we're watering them late at night and they're going to bed with wet feet, wet foliage, and things like that. So sometimes we are our own worst enemies. Now, I know environment and rain and things like that and our humidity, we just have to deal with that. But there's things that we can do in order to give our plants in the landscape or in pots or wherever the best chance at being able to avoid these diseases. So This is one I just want you to remember that, we use fungicides for bad cultural practices, not because of the diseases. Okay. Um, there are two kinds of diseases. Okay. We have infectious diseases in our plants, and these are transmissible from plant to plant. And these are caused by pathogens. So when we talk about transmissible, they can be transmitted via water droplets. They can be transmitted sometimes via wind when the spores are ready. They can be transmitted from insects. Insects are great vectors for passing on viruses, and other things that could negatively affect our plant growth. But then we also have this other area, these non-infectious, this disorder that's caused by unfavorable physical environments, okay, that affect. And so sometimes we have issues where people think that it's a disease, and they start treating it with a fungicide, but really, it's a fertility issue, or we had a low temperature, or it got dry, or something uh, to that effect that it could present itself maybe as a infectious disease, but in fact, it really isn't, and it's a different disorder. And so this is the challenge, and this is why when we get calls or uh, people send us emails, sometimes we come back with a load of questions, a lot of questions, because we really need to drill down and find out what is that root cause that is causing this issue. So if we look at this, what makes plants sick? Okay, and we sort of call this the plant disease donut, and it's really kind of nice the way it breaks things down. So uh, in the center, we talk about disease in the broad sense, but then we break it down into these three different areas. All right. So here on the right, we talk about our diseases, and they're caused by viruses or viroids. We can see bacteria, fungi, parasitic plants, nematodes, and right on that border there between disease and injury, we have insects and mites because they can be vectors for some of these diseases. So they can carry them. They go in with their mouth part, in their saliva, or they leave it behind, or they inject it, and the disease can then establish in that plant. And then we have injury, which are usually pretty easy in most cases. Insect injury, we can usually tell if we've got caterpillars, they're chewing the edges of the leaf. We can usually tell that. We can tell mite damage and things like that. There's other herbivores that could be out there. Small animals that might feed on it. Then we come over here to the left side under injury, and we've got drought, which is sort of right on the border there, along with heat or frost, and these are usually easier to tell when you have that issue. Mechanical impact, if there's we've got wind issues or things like that, these can also cause injury. But we can usually narrow that down. If an event occurred at a certain time and then we see the aftermath of it, we can usually attribute it to that. These disorders on the left side, this is where it can look one way. People may think it's a disease, but really it could be, in certain cases, air pollutants, other chemicals. Herbicide drift is a classic here, especially when it comes to putting out, weed and feeds in your lawns and things like that. It could definitely mask or present itself potentially as a disease. Soil acidity and alkalinity. All right, what's going to happen there as our pH shifts one way or another? Certain minerals or nutrients can be tied up or become toxic at higher levels and show up in the foliage. And we're going to think it's a disease. We're going to treat it with a fungicide, but really we're not seeing any response because that's not the root cause. The root cause is the pH. Nutrient imbalances, which could be caused by the acidity and the alkalinity. And when we talk about low oxygen, we're talking about that in the soil where it's growing too wet. And so we're seeing some issues that water uptake isn't occurring. root growth isn't occurring the way we want it to, and of course nutrients and water aren't moving through the plant. So then we run into some issues on that spectrum. So what parts of the plant can be affected by disease and pathogens? Basically the whole plant, and this is the challenge. Um, from the roots on up to the growing tips, out into the fruits and the flowers, we can have issues. Diseases can present themselves. So you can see uh, just in this diagram here, on the left side is what the healthy plant side of the plant would look like. We've got great looking foliage. The roots look happy. The stem is nice and presents itself well. We can see some flowers on the end. We can see fruit production on the end. But then we come to the other side. This is almost like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde plant. We've got poor root growth, so we've got issues there. So something's going on in the soil. Crown gall, which is caused by a bacterium, which is going to affect nutrient and water flow up and down. We can see this wilting. So this is one of the biggest issues when we see these wilts. Is it caused by the roots? Is it caused by a problem? A bacterium or a fungi that are causing that to wilt? Are we overwatering? And so these are some of the things we've got to narrow down in order to be able to make a good diagnosis. We can see cankers here where part of that bark or part of that stem could have been either damaged or there is a pathogen that's causing it. And then we see, especially if you grow tomatoes, we can see fruit rots. We can see spotting on it. Sometimes this can be caused by an insect. Other times it is a pathogen. And then we can see blights here where just that new growth doesn't look quite right. It doesn't open all the way. It just doesn't look real happy, as I like to say. So um, the main thing I want you to take away from today is to look at the big picture, not just focus on the initial symptom, because you've got to sometimes take a couple steps back and understand maybe what the plant is going through or what's happened around the plant in order to be able to determine exactly what the issue is. So the first thing, and this is plant pathology 101, the disease triangle. In order for a disease to occur, we have to have these three areas working together. All right. We have to have a susceptible host. So what does that mean? We've got a plant that for some reason might be stressed, and our plants in this area can be stressed quite often. Okay. So we have a susceptible host. We have a plant that isn't growing well, it's not healthy. And this is why when we talk about when you purchase plants, you want to make sure you're starting with a healthy plant. Don't buy something that is stressed, that is root bound, that's got some issues, because you could be setting yourself up for problems down the road. So we have a susceptible host, and then we have to have a conducive environment. What does that mean? Um, we're in Houston, lots of humidity, lots of rain. And that is usually the key problems. Poor air movement. If you've got a landscape that's too overgrown and you're not getting good air movement through it. So it's an environment where, as we come across, the last leg is you've got to have the pathogen. It's got to be that pathogen's got to be in the area. It's got to be available, and it's got to be ready to grow. And so if we have the pathogen and the environment is ideal and we've got a host that is stressed, that is susceptible, then we find that sweet spot here in the middle where the disease will present itself and we will start to see those symptoms on that plant. If we just have a conducive environment, we get a lot of rain or we have a lot of humidity, but we've got a healthy plant, and maybe we even have the pathogen in the area. But if that plant is healthy, it's growing, it's thriving, a lot of times it's not even going to be an issue. It's not going to be a problem. The same issue is if we've got a susceptible host and we've got a pathogen, but the environment is not quite right for that pathogen to grow. we're not going to see that disease present itself. Okay. So these three legs of this stool, of this triangle, we have to have a susceptible host, conducive environment, and the pathogen. All three of those things have to come together in order for that disease to present itself on the plant. All right. And here's just the typical, here's a disease cycle. This is for early blight on tomato. And so we can see here, we've got, um, over seasoning. We've got some of these spores that are left over in the debris. This is why we always talk about cleaning up your gardens between seasons or before something else goes in. Don't leave anything that might be diseased laying around. Bag it up and get it out of there. Don't even put it in your compost if it's got disease issues. All right, because we don't want those potential spores that could cause problems down the road. So we have the spores, and then the next thing you know, conditions are ideal. We've got a young seedling here, say, could be susceptible. Its systems aren't all up and running yet, and it's inoculated. And so what happens is that these spores get in, they start to grow, they go through their reproductive stage, and then we end up with more spore. We have the lesions, and we end up with more spores. What happened? They do. There's other plants in the area. It is in this case dispersed by the wind or the rain, and then these other plants start to show these symptoms. You can see the spores land on the foliage, and we've got some more issues. What happens again, like anything else, it's going to try to reproduce. So that conidia or that spore lands on the leaf surface. Conditions are ideal, and then the next thing you know, if or any other tissue like that, it just starts to multiply itself. So we see the disease, it presents itself, but then what happens is here we've got potential reinfection. So this whole cycle can start again. And that's where when you're controlling or you're trying to get a handle on this, where can you break this cycle? And that's the main key. So, over here by the over seasoning, it's left behind in the debris. If you clean up properly and you bag it and you get it out of there, you're going to start off on a much better footing. If you've got healthy transplants that are going in and they are ready to grow and thrive, you're going to be in much better shape. So you always, whether, I talked about beneficial insects and I talk about IPM, the same thing happens with diseases. You have to understand the cycle, and then where can you attack or break that cycle in order to get the upper hand on the disease. All right, quick question. And you can post these answers in the chat box if you want. That'll work kind of nice. What are the three factors needed in the development of a plant disease? Is it one, it has to have host, water, and a fungus? Two, is it needs a host, a pathogen, and the environment? Is it three, it has to have the pathogen, the environment, and a bug? Or is it four, none of the above? Okay, let's see. Twos, twos, twos. And I see some of them are master gardeners, so they remembered their plant pathology. Excellent. Yes, the answer is number two. So, as we said, that triangle, you need the host, it's got to be susceptible, you need the pathogen, and then you need the ideal environment for all three of those to come together in order for that disease to present itself on the plant. Okay, excellent, great. So let's talk about fungi. Fungi, they're filamentous organisms. For the most part, they are microscopic, but some produce large structures such as the toadstools and the mushrooms. Okay, and we see them, they occur in our lawns, especially if there's high organic matter or if there's very wet conditions, we will see them. The interesting thing is there's over 100,000 fungal species. Most of them are beneficial or they're benign. And there's only, out of that 100,000, there's only 8,000 fungal species that cause plant diseases, so 8%. So it's a very small percentage of the fungi that are out there in the world that will cause problems for the plants that we're growing. But it always seems like, they always seem to find those plants. And again, if the conditions are right, those spores will find it and cause some problems. So most of the diseases occurring in the landscapes are caused by fungi. All right, so most of our problems are fungal related. We do have some bacterial. Very rarely we'll see some virus issues and things like that. So 85% of plant diseases are caused by fungi. So you can see here, this is probably part of a fairy ring. Is it really a major problem? Usually not, because once conditions dry out, we usually don't see any major issues with it. The picture up here in the upper right hand, this is hypoxylin canker, which we will see a lot of times in our trees, but we normally see it after extreme drought conditions. So if you go back, I guess it was 2011 or whenever we had some extremely bad drought seasons. We started to see a lot of hypoxylin canker, but we didn't see that canker for about, at least in most cases, about 2 years after the fact. So a lot of people were figuring, well, the drought's gone. It shouldn't be an issue, but really we were seeing this rear its head usually when the plant goes under an extreme stress. And then the other one here we could see is botrytis, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we work our way through. So how do these grow? All right, so we talked about the conidia or the spores. They'll land on the surface. They'll germinate, similar to what a seed does. It puts out this structure, hyphae. It'll attach, and then it'll penetrate into the surface of the leaf. It will grow, establish itself, thrive because of the conditions. And then it will go into a reproductive stage where it will sporulate. So it will break its way through. These spores will emerge, whether it's wind or water will carry them. And this is where we start to see major outbreaks when it goes into that sporulation stage, because then there's thousands of these spores, and all it needs is the right conditions again, and it will start to perpetuate itself. So understanding how a fungus grows is again a key to understanding how you might be able to break that cycle and control it. All right, so here's botrytis on here it is on poinsettia. Now these are extreme cases. I hope it never gets to this stage, any of these images, but it may, especially here is a zinnia with the botrytis. You can see the hyphae or the hairs growing on it, and if water sits in there for too long and the spores are available, they'll wipe out those flower buds. And here you can see it on marigolds. A plant that doesn't self-clean, maybe this is where deadheading would have avoided this. If the flower after the fact was, you had deadheaded it, it wouldn't have been susceptible to these spores. Here we can see in this one, this foliage was probably the problem. Here was it probably didn't have the airflow, and so conditions were ideal for those spores to attach and grow and really just do a number on the lower foliage here. So this is probably one of the biggest issues that we see, especially with herbaceous plants, is botrytis. Now, if we talk about diagnosing fungal diseases, usually they're pretty easy to tell, either without a microscope or a lens, or with some magnification. But you can see some, it's easy to see here. We've got some spores on this upper right leaf. We have the area that's infected, and these spores, it's in that reproductive stage, and so that's where we want to break that cycle. We don't want to get to that reproductive stage, because then we can have a lot more issues. We can see it here again on this image here on the left. We can see this area of infection here, and we can see that it is beginning to go into that reproductive stage, which is going to cause us more problems. Here on turf, we can see some rust issues. Okay, rust is a type of fungus, and it's those spores are there and they're ready. Whether you come through with a mower and you cut that off, and then you carry it along the rest of your lawn, or it mulches in, those spores are there, and it's just another source to keep that cycle going. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about bacterial diseases. So these are simple single-celled organisms. There's approximately 9,000 bacterial species that have been described, and only about 80 species are plant pathogens. Okay, so again, a very small population sector of that group causes us the problems. Bacteria, they're a completely different. I'm going to say animal. They're not animals, but it's a completely different life cycle. Presents itself differently. It's got this gummy material around the outside. It has, if you remember from freshman biology, it has a flagella. So you can see these arrows, and you can see, hopefully you can tell that little whip-like structure that it uses, whether it's in water or any kind of fluid, to move itself around. And here you can see, this is a bacterial disease on this geranium. But somebody that isn't aware, they may think that I just need to put more water on there, and I keep watering, I keep watering, I keep watering, and I keep having this issue. And in this case, it is a bacterial issue. So it's understanding, what are some of the signs if it's bacterial versus, a drought situation. All right, so how do they reproduce? Bacteria, they divide asexually. It's called binary fission. So if you have one, it splits in two, and then those two split, and then those. So it's just like the old commercial. And I told two friends, and so on and so on and so on. So they can go through this process very rapidly. And in ideal conditions, they can divide every 20 minutes. So at that rate, one bacterium can produce 100 million bacteria in a time span of about 10 hours. So, these are the challenges. This is what, we are dealing with if we have the right conditions for these plants or for these diseases. Okay. All right. So how do we diagnose? How do we know if it's bacterial? So with the fungi, you could see it would spread out through the entire plant. It wasn't really well defined. Where if it's bacterial, it will stay within, in between the veins. It will look almost mosaic-like. Okay. Now we often use the term mosaic-like if it's got virus issues. But you can see here on this the larger image below here, how it stays very confined within the structure of the leaf. It's not bleeding out. It's staying within a very set area. You don't see it washing across. It hits the main vein here, it stops, and then it's very blocky. So that's one of the ways, the tips that we can look at to see if it's bacterial or fungal. The other way is if you cut the tissue, or if you cut the stem, and you were to just put it in and dip the end in like a tube of water or some water that you could see, you can see here's a stem that's got some bacterial issues, and where that line is, as you follow it down, you can see the bacterial streaming or oozing out of there. The same with this piece of leaf tissue. You can see this, it almost looks like a halo, this cloud. And that is the bacterial, the spores streaming out of there. So this is one quick and easy way to help you decide or determine, am I dealing with a bacterial issue, or is it a fungal issue? If it's a fungal issue, you're not going to see this occur. But if it is bacterial, you will see that. And then if you send samples on, say to the lab, to confirm it up at A&M. They can grow it out. They can give you an exact name and identify that pathogen for you if needed. When we talk about bacteria, we often talk about blights, and they normally have sort of that um, as we call it almost looks like a water soaked spotting to it. So you can see it's staying within the structures, but it just looks like it's been wet for too long. And so here's three examples. This one's kind of nice with it being backlit. You can see it further along here on the left side, but you can see here that it's occurring also in this area. So this is one of the reasons or one of the clues to help you determine if it's bacterial or fungal. All right, so we talked about fungal diseases, some of the how to identify. We talked about bacterial. Let's touch quickly on control principles. How are we going to control these? So we've got these 6 topics here. We'll go through. We talk about resistance, exclusion, protection, eradication, avoidance, and therapy. Okay, so what does that all mean? So if we talk about resistance, we're going to talk about the plant we're starting with. We're going to talk about the genetics of it. We're going to talk about, especially with tomatoes, as you can see in this image here, Better Boy, hybrid, VFN. What does that VFN mean? It means it's resistant to verticillium, fusarium, and nematodes. Okay. So things like that, we see this snapdragon, its resistance to rust. Okay, so resistance doesn't mean it can't get it, but it's going to be tougher for those rust spores to really establish on that plant because there's something inside that plant. The breeders have been able to figure out certain varieties are more resistant than other ones. And the same thing here with the zinnia. We talk about you know mildew resistant. So there it's and resistance is there's always a sliding scale on that. So you always have to there's resistance and then there's tolerance, and that's always the key. Um, if we can get through with tolerant varieties where you might see a little bit of it, but it doesn't affect the overall quality of the plant, then I'm good with that. If we can get to the resistance part where it doesn't see, we don't see it at all, and we are seeing that with some of the Coravincas now that they're resistant to aerial Phytophthora, that's even better. Um, then there's indirect resistance. So, we talk about some of these adapted traits. They're drought tolerant, things like that. So if they're drought tolerant, it's not the plant's going to be healthier. It's not going to be susceptible. So we're not going to see possibly some of these spores and some of these diseases attacking that plant because the plant's going to be healthier. Like everything else, there's some caveats, and that is, where are you finding this information and how reliable is it? So if you're looking at this with the seed companies, where you're getting your packets, um, they've you got to. I would say you're going to feel good about that, but always, make sure you're confirming things like that. Especially with the tomatoes. The way the industry is now, everything, if they say it's VFN resistant, I feel good with that information. But you've always got to make sure and double check because a lot of the companies are selling the same varieties. You want to make sure is it resistant, is it tolerant, and where was it trialed if you can find that information out. Well, we're doing much better. The seed companies and the universities are doing much better trialings across the various regions. So whether we're in the deep south, on the west coast, up in the northeast, things like that. So resistance is one of the ways to combat some of these diseases. The other one is exclusion. All right. So how do we keep it out? You know, are we starting with healthy plants? If you're a grower, are you buying certified plant material that you know is clean? You can see up here, are we maintaining our equipment? Even as a gardener, are you cleaning your tools after? Say you pruned off a stem that didn't look real good. Are you cleaning that those clippers, or you just pop them back in your back pocket, and the next thing you know, you're cutting it you're using it to prune something else. You could inadvertently be passing along spores that could cause problems down the road. So try to keep that area as clean as possible. And you can see even up here, and I'm sure when we were traveling, and if you traveled international, you would see these dogs as you're coming in through baggage claim. They're looking for plants. They're looking for anything that could potentially be a problem. If you ever fly through Miami, you're going to see them quite often because stuff is coming up from South America. Um, any of the big international hubs. Whenever I would fly to Holland and you come in from Holland, you'd always see these dogs around because they would just want to make sure that people aren't bringing plant material that could potentially be diseased. And even if you travel, within the country, interstate, if you're coming from a high agriculture area, Texas to Florida or Texas to California, where agriculture is a big money producer for them. They don't want certain things being brought in, especially if it's citrus. Harris County is in a quarantine area for citrus greening, so we are not supposed to buy. If we buy a citrus tree in Harris County, we should not be taking it over to Austin to plant because they are not a quarantine area, and we could potentially be bringing citrus greening into the area. So exclusion is really key. If we got healthy plants and we can exclude it, make sure we're working with clean equipment. That's a plus. Then there is protection. All right. So there are times where we've got to come in and we've got to treat it, whether it's chemically with fungicides, biological barriers. And that's down here where we can look at treating with some of these soil additives that will improve root growth and protect the plant. And so you can see where we've got our check. We've got without the soil amendment, germination wasn't that great. But with the BioGuard, Rhizoctonia was introduced, and those plants are still thriving. So there are biological barriers out there that growers or you can incorporate into your soil to help. And then there's physical barriers. So maybe instead of growing on the ground, we're growing up in these raised beds where we've got a little bit better control, and we're not going to have as many issues. So protection is the other key. If we've got a problem, we may have to eradicate. Okay, so we've got images here where we're solarizing. Maybe we've got nematode problems, or maybe there's some other issues. So we're going to solarize that soil. We're going to take it out of production, let Mother Nature help us in the heat of the summer, and just bake the heck out of that soil in order to kill off the potential pathogens. Here we can see in a golf green where they are treating for nematode problems, and they're actually doing an injection. And last but not least, with the eradication, if you've got areas that are you've got some disease material, get them out of there, sweep them out, clean them up, bag them up, don't compost, and get rid of it. Get rid of that source of potential spores. Another one here is avoidance. Okay, so how can we trick or work around the potential problems of these pathogen? Whether we talk about rotating our planting schedule, not putting tomatoes in the same bed year in and year out because we know we're going to run into problems. Alternating our planting times, laying out your landscape the proper way so you've got good airflow. You've got room between the plants. We're not the biggest. I always get questions. Well, I want to put up a screen. I bought these shrubs and they told me to plant them on 3-foot centers. And it's a wax myrtle, and a wax myrtle is going to get 10 feet across. Well, do you really need to be planting them that close? So understanding the plants that you are working with and what the ultimate goal is going to be a key in order to keep those plants healthy and disease free. And then therapy. There are certain systemics. There are some fungicides that are systemic, so they will be taken up into the plant and work their way through. And if the spore lands and tries to, penetrate the leaf surface, that fungicide is in there and will stop that from occurring. So there are some systemic chemicals, and then the other one is just pruning, getting rid of that potential, that diseased stem or that diseased branch, or and then when you do, as in this image here, make sure you're cleaning that blade after the fact, because you don't want to pass that on. You go out there to prune another tree, and you never know how long those spores are going to last or what it is. So you always want to be able to clean that up, and make sure you're working with clean material, clean tools, in order to minimize the spread of the disease. All right, so let's look at some diseases. We're going to wrap this up looking at a couple diseases that we see here. So here's a boxwood, and this is one that we get quite often. So we've got this boxwood, and if you notice, people will say, well, it's got one stem that it doesn't look good. The other ones are okay, but maybe they're starting to decline. So if you don't know this already, a lot of times when you work in the nursery, there's more than one liner or more than one cutting that goes into that plant in order to get a nice full plant. So that's why sometimes, as we see here, this one is declining much faster than the other two. But we get this browning, we get this off color. You can see it just doesn't look happy. So 9 times out of 10, people are going to think, I need to put more water on it. It's not getting enough water. It's drying out. What's the issue? It's actually Phytophthora root rot. The first thing when I either get a question or I get pictures or someone calls, I ask them, look at this area here where the base of the stem interfaces with the soil line. And if you see this splitting, which you see here, you can see that canker right there and the way it's split. 9 times out of 10, our area, it's going to be Phytophthora root rot. So that the root rot is occurring. We've got some issues. This is starting to split, and what happens? It affects the uptake and translocation of water and nutrients. The root, if you lift that out, the roots are going to be dark brown. They're going to be black. And so, as I mentioned, if you've got 3 cuttings or 3 liners in there, if this root system is affected, there's spores there, and so it's going to affect the other 2 liners later on, and you'll see that progression. And if you don't catch it soon, whether it's a fungicide treatment, at this stage, I would say just lift it out. You can come in and probably do a drench to be on the safe side, because you don't want it going down the line. Normally, when we have these boxwoods, we've got them planted in rows. They're outlining a bed or something. And so we'll have issues. The other problem is, it is probably being overwatered too much, and there's a good chance there's not enough. Boxwoods are very tight, so airflow through there is going to be an issue. So that's one of the challenges. Powdery mildew. This is a definite constant. We usually always see this early on in the season as we see new growth coming out. We may see some now, but we've dried out. So I would say we're probably not going to see it now, but in certain cases you might. It can cause leaf drop. It overwinters in the buds. So that's why a lot of times we'll see it as we get that first flush, because those buds are there, the spores lay, they're dormant. And then the next thing you know, as the conditions start to be ideal for the new growth to break out, they're also probably, those conditions are ideal for those spores to wake up and start to grow. So that's why sometimes in certain varieties, when you see that spring flush, you'll see this powdery mildew on them, and it's because those spores have overwintered in those buds. Conditions are ideal, and we see that flush. A lot of times, once the conditions change, things dry out, we don't see a lot of negative effect, but it early on, it causes some issues. You might see some tip die back over time, but usually it's not as big of a problem throughout the rest of the growing season. Now here's another one, crepe myrtle. And we've got a lot of crepe myrtles out there. So this one we can see, this is Cercospora. This is a leaf spot. This again is another fungal issue. And we can see these circular spots here all throughout. It's even starting to work its way in on the edges. This foliage will eventually drop. Usually it's going to be the older foliage we're going to see it on. We're going to see it on the internal part of the plant where we're going to see it. In a lot of cases, if it's the older foliage and the new growth is healthy and doing well, my recommendation is as it falls or you pick it off, bag it, just get rid of it. Don't let that foliage sit there in that litter layer, down below the plant, because that's potential spores for future problems. You're going to see it on the older foliage again, and usually it's sort of spotty. I haven't seen it in heavy cases, at least in crepe myrtle. Mine will get it every now and then a little bit. I usually just pull off the foliage, bag it, get rid of it, and then move on. And it's usually not that big of a problem. But it's just something to be aware of. Now, if you're seeing it on the new growth, then we've got to take some other issues, take some other steps, because then we're going to have it's going to affect the quality of the plant. Here's Entomosporum on Indian hawthorn. Again, and this is one where we get these purplish red spots, and then we can see the color change that occurs around it. So this is textbook. And a lot of times, they talk about we've got warm, humid weather, and then it's the air circulation. A lot of times, we use the Indian hawthorns in foundation plantings. They've been there since the house has been built. And what happens is they get so big and so tight that this Entomosporum occurs on the lower foliage. So the next thing you know is you've only got green growth on the tips because everything else has defoliated because of this. And you can see all of the old leaves that are laying there where it's another spot for these spores to grow. So again, make sure you're providing an ideal growing environment for these plants in order to keep these diseases at bay. Roses, powdery mildew, and we've got a great area for growing powdery mildew. So you can see it again on the new growth, on the top of the foliage. You're going to see it. It can coat much of the surface of the leaf. If it's a heavy infestation, it will stunt the overall growth. So usually we're going to see it in the temperatures here when it's 62 to 75, which is about the time, that's the temperatures we're in now. But what we're probably missing is we are not that humid now. So if we do get some rain or we get some wet conditions and the humidity can go up, we could see that this time of year. Usually it's in the spring. We usually don't see it in the heat of the summer because the temperature's too high. But this is the time of year where we get some cool mornings and we get some dew buildup and things like that. That micro environment on that plant could lead to some of that. So again, mildew, it doesn't look good. It's more of an aesthetic. But if you have a heavy infestation, it's going to affect the overall growth of the plant. And now we talk about downy mildew on roses. So this is something completely different. It manifests itself. You're going to see it on the top, and you're going to get these purplish brown spots. Now, as with the powdery mildew, the spores grew on the leaf surface. With downy mildew, the spores are growing on the underside. So if you flip that leaf over, you're going to see yellow spots and things like that on the underside. You're going to see the spores on the underside, and then it manifests itself with this purplish brown effect on the tissue on the upper side. So again, spores are spread through the air. So if we've got an area where there's not a good air movement, and it's very stagnant, it's very easy for these spores to grow. And here we can see the difference. So if we look on the underside, we've got downy mildew, or actually, this is the young stages of downy mildew on the top side of the foliage. And then we can see the spores growing here for powdery mildew, just to give you an idea of what the difference is. So if you've got roses and you're seeing that purpling, look on the underside, you're probably going to see the spores there. If you've got white spores on top, you're dealing with powdery mildew. And the last one, we've all seen this if you've grown any kind of roses here. Now we are starting to grow fine roses that are resistant to this, but black spot is always been a major problem. These spots, they will have yellow rings around them on both sides of the leaf. So whether you're looking on the top or the bottom, you're going to see these spots and then this yellowing, and then you can see how it gets this water-soaked look over time as it really takes over the plant. So green leaves will go from green to yellow, and then they'll drop. So when they do drop, make sure you clean that up, get rid of it, bag it, and get it out of there. And it's usually the younger leaves that are most susceptible. So the leaves that are less than 2 weeks old are more susceptible to this fungus than the older, mature leaves. All right, so resources, and actually I'm going to switch my screen here because I'd rather take you to the websites. But Aggie Horticulture, there's vegetable resources. This is new. This Tree MD is from the Texas Forest Service. I haven't had a lot of time to look at it, but it's got some good information. And then there's information here on Aggie Turf. So hold on, let me switch my screen here for you real quick. And then I will, let's see, here we are. Okay, so here's the vegetable resources. So this is the Aggie Horticulture site. And so these gardening fact sheets there's fact sheets on all genus of vegetables, and there'll be information there. But I wanted to show you this. If I click on the vegetable problem solvers, they've got some solvers for cucurbits, for tomatoes, which everybody's always looking for, and then there's even one for watermelon. But if you click on the tomato one, you can look at the disorders, whether you've got a green fruit, a ripe fruit, insect pest, leaf, stem, or root. And if you click on leaf, because that's usually where we're going to see a lot of the problems, you can see some very good images. So it will help you be able to troubleshoot what issues you might have. They've even got some physiological disorders when we talked about abiotic, salt damage or phosphorus deficiency. So the Aggie Horticulture site, and if you go back to the back here, right here, vegetable resources. Definitely, if you're into vegetables and you're growing them, this is a site you should be aware of regardless. You should check it out. The other one is, let's see, I'll just go right down the line here. If we look at Aggie Turf, there's some, this is their publications. So it's aggieturf.tamu.edu. And there's some disease control. If you are a golf course superintendent on nematode problems, but it talks about fairy rings, take all root rot for warm season turf grasses, and then large patch. We're getting into large patch season, so that's one that's probably worth taking a look at. And then that third one is right here, this Tree MD. This is a new one. So there is an index. You can go by symptom. You can go by the type of tree. But this has just been rolled out, I think, about 2 weeks ago. So if you are having some tree issues, you can always look here first. And then down the road, if it's stumping you, we can help you out. You can always send us images. You can let us know what's going on, and we can help you out with that. So let me switch back here real quick to where I was, which is...
Paul, we have a few questions when you're ready.
Okay, sure thing.
Okay, so the first one is from Larry Leasing. He says, his okra is producing well, but has a powdery mildew. Does he need to spray, or are there better cultural practices that will prevent in the future? He's practices rotation.
Well, at this time of year, you're probably coming towards the end of the season for your okra. So at this point, I probably wouldn't worry about spraying. Maybe just remove that foliage, clean it up. If any of the leaves have defoliated, you might want to get them up, clean them up. Also, you're going to have to watch during the growing season. You might want to do some preventative sprays early on. But if it's not, and I bet you in most cases, if it hasn't affected your production, which I know most of the okra are they thrive down here, growing quite well. If it's not affecting your production and you can live with it, I would live with it. If it is affecting the overall the overall growth of the plant, or you're seeing reduced production with regard to the fruit, then go ahead and treat it.
Okay, thank you. The next one is from Priscilla Cope, and her question is it best to burn diseased plants or just throw them in the trash?
Since we're in an urban area, I would say just bag it up, tie that bag off, and get rid of it that way. Now, if you're out in the country or you've got area where you can do burns like that, you can. But if it lays around, the longer it lays around, there's always that chance that those spores are going to get out. So I would say for an urban area, bag it up, toss it, get rid of it. But if you do live in a country, if you're more rural and you can burn it, then you can do that also.
Okay, awesome. And then the last question is from a guest. I don't have a name. Their question is there an equivalent series for Bexar County where I live? If so, what is the URL?
So Bexar County, so that's San Antonio. They do not have, they're not doing the homegrown, but you've got an excellent horticulture agent out there, David Rodriguez. So I would definitely reach out to him, check out their website. But he is, whether it's ornamentals or vegetables, David's an excellent horticulture agent. So I would definitely reach out to him. And if you've got questions or you're seeing something different in your area, he would be an excellent resource to work with.
Okay, and that is it for questions. Oh,
okay.
Wait, hold on, sorry.
Oh, Jim.
What about
Jim Wells or Duval County? I don't know if we have horticulture agents up there. I'm not even sure where Jim Wells County or Duval County is. So what I would recommend is if you just Google AgriLife extension and you put Jim Wells County in there or Duval County in there, they will have a website and you can see who the agents are. There is always you can always, I know they're going to have at least an ag and natural resources agent. So you can always contact that ag and natural resources agent because he may also have a horticulture background. And that agent, he or she will be able to help you. So that is not an issue. And if they can't help you, they will get you in touch with someone nearby that can answer your question. Okay.
That's it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you're coming away with a nugget or two of information that you didn't know before. And I just wanted to remind you all that next week, same time, same station, we will be here at 10 o'clock, and Shannon Dietz will be talking on fall gardening chores. So I want to thank you all for joining us. I hope you all have a great day. Stay safe, and we will see you next week. Have a good day.